Hi everyone, welcome to or back to my channel. It's a rainy, cold spring day, so I figured this was the perfect time to share my thoughts with you on all of the things I read in April. April was a wild ride reading-wise. I went from a haunted cruise ship to emotional deep dives, from rom-com flops to an indie gem that completely knocked my socks off. There's horror, heartbreak, humor, and one book I wish I had DNF'd. So if you're into variety, this wrap-up's got something for you. Let's start with Deep Cuts by Holly Brickley. This one completely blew me away. Deep Cuts follows Percy, a college student with no musical talent, but a deep obsessive love for music. When she meets Joe, an actual songwriter, the two form a creative and often emotionally messy partnership that spans years. It's set in the early 2000s and moves between Berkeley, Brooklyn, and San Francisco, which gives it this really vivid, almost nostalgic atmosphere, even if you didn't grow up in the 90s like I did. What stood out most to me about this one was how the timeline flowed. It covers a lot of ground: relationships, ambition, creative jealousy, but it never felt choppy or rushed. Everything unfolded so naturally, and the way Percy's love of music is woven through the story felt so lived in. An unexpected standout for me was the friendship between Percy and Zoe. It was complex, supportive, and as compelling as any of the romantic themes in this novel. If you liked Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow for its emotional depth and creative dynamics, I honestly think you'll love this. It's about talent and art, but also about how relationships can nurture or totally stifle you. Easily one of my favorites this month. I gave this one 5 stars. Second 5-star of 2025. And I do want to just apologize for all the artificial light that you'll probably see reflecting off these books. It is incredibly dark outside, so I'm not really able to rely on natural lighting. So sorry to blind you if that's what's happening. Next, let's talk about one that I was so excited to pick up, and that is Blood Cruise by Mats Strandberg. Now, this was a fun surprise. For a translated horror novel, Blood Cruise was a smooth, engaging read. I was really impressed by how readable it was. It's a big credit to both the author and the translator for capturing such a vivid, creepy atmosphere with so many distinct voices. Despite juggling a large ensemble cast, I never felt lost or confused. Every character had a clear voice and a compelling backstory, which really grounded the wild premise. The booze cruise setting was perfect, claustrophobic, chaotic, and strangely believable as the backdrop for a slow-building nightmare. The tension escalates really well, and once things start going off the rails, it's restless in the best way. My only small critiques: it's a bit long, and the origin of the horror element felt a little thin if you start digging into the details. But honestly, I was having too much fun to really care. The ending struck a great balance, offering a satisfying conclusion while still leaving the door open just enough. Not an all-time favorite, but a total blast. Highly recommended for horror fans. 4 stars. Another one that I talked about in my April TBR video, Fantastic Land by Mike Bakoven. This one had such a wild premise. Lord of the Flies, set in a Florida theme park after a hurricane, has trapped a bunch of teen employees with no phones, few adults, and no rules. What could go wrong? Apparently everything. This story is told in a documentary style format through a series of interviews after the fact, which makes it feel eerily real. Almost like you're listening to a true crime podcast about something way too awful to have actually happened. That interview style does help sell the horror as something plausible, but for me, it also kind of deflated the tension. Knowing upfront that these are the survivors recounting past events took away a lot of the stakes. I didn't feel the same sense of danger or immediacy I might have felt if we were in the chaos with them. Still, the idea of rival tribes forming inside a broken down Disneyland type park pirates, shop girls, freaks, mole people. It was as bizarre as it sounds and somehow totally worked in this over-the-top survival horror setting, even if the format didn't fully work for me. 3.5 stars. Okay, next let's talk about Wild Dark Shore by Charlotte McConaghy. This was my second book by Charlotte McConaghy after Migrations, which I loved. So I went into this one with high expectations. And while her lyrical writing and deep concern for the climate crisis once again shines through, especially the haunting imagery of the rising sea levels and humanity's fragile link to nature, Wild Dark Shore just didn't come together for me. The setting is fascinating. An isolated family on an island near Antarctica, caretaking the world's largest seed bank, when a mysterious woman named Rowan washes ashore. But what could have been a tense, emotional survival story got bogged down by some really odd choices by the author. The lusty tension between Rowan and Dominic felt wildly out of place and honestly cringe, to me anyway. And every male-female romantic dynamic in this book gave me the ick. It didn't help that the central mystery barely held my attention, and when the truth was revealed, it was more frustrating than satisfying, especially considering the ending. Still, McConaghy's prose and thematic intent remains strong, and I'm definitely not done reading her work. This one just didn't hit the way Migrations did, but still 3.5 stars. Next, let's talk about The Bandit Queens by Perini Schroff. This one I listened to on Audible, and honestly, that might be the best way to go. The narration adds a lot to the humor and voice of the story. I found it really enhanced the darkly funny tone. At its core, this is a revenge fantasy wrapped in a sharp, satirical look at patriarchy and survival in a small Indian village. And it is so satisfying to see these women start taking matters into their own hands, especially after everything they've endured. There's a lot to love here. The bold premise, the commentary, the dry humor, and a sisterhood that forms among these women. But something about the second half didn't quite land for me. I'm not even sure what shifted. It just lost its spark. I stopped caring the way I wanted to, and the final resolution didn't pack the emotional punch I'd hoped for. That said, in the right mood, I could totally see this being a vibe. The concept is clever, and if you enjoy dark humor with a bit of feminist rage, it's worth picking up. 3.5 stars. Next, let's talk Deep End by Ali Hazelwood. This was my second Ali Hazelwood, and I did like it better than The Love Hypothesis, which was the first I had read, though it's still not a new favorite. What worked for me? The college athlete setting, the swimmer and diver dynamics were fun and gave a fresh spin to Hazelwood's usual STEM vibes. I also really liked Lucas as the love interest. He had just the right mix of emotionally invested but not over the top, which made him super easy to root for. Where it lost me a bit was the setup. The casual fling arrangement felt oddly clinical, and the chemistry took a while to click. Also, the story just didn't leave a strong impression. A week out, I had already forgotten most of their backstories, which isn't a great sign. And also, 2 Olympic level athletes and their academic prodigies. Okay, sure, why not? Some people are just doing the absolute most, I guess. All in all, it was a quick and entertaining read, but ultimately kind of forgettable. What did I give this one? 3 stars. All right, so next, Say You'll Remember Me by Abby Jimenez. I've read and loved all of Abby Jimenez's books, so again, I went into this one with high expectations. And while it definitely had her signature cozy charm, seriously, the pets alone could sell this one. Just look at the cover. It didn't quite hit the emotional highs I've come to expect from her. What did work for me was her handling of family dynamics. Jimenez always weaves in deeper themes with care, but the romance itself just was a little too sweet. Xavier, a swoony, gorgeous vet, and Samantha, who's in marketing and always has impressive one-liners at the ready. They're just a little too perfect. Their only real obstacle was their long-distance logistics, and without more conflict between them, it just felt flat. I found myself wishing for a bit more messiness, something to make their connection feel earned rather than inevitable. That said, Jimenez still knows how to write comfort reads that go down easy, and I did enjoy the cozy moments, the humor, and the underlying heart. Not a new favorite, but still a solid 3-star read. Next, let's talk about Acts of Desperation by Megan Nolan. This one hit hard. Acts of Desperation is told from the perspective of an unnamed narrator who falls completely, painfully in love with a man, an older man. And that love quickly turns into something obsessive, unhealthy, and at times quietly destructive. The writing is incredibly raw and intimate. I tabbed so many lines because Nolan has this way of getting under the skin of how we romanticize pain and latch on to people who don't really see us. The narrator isn't polished or sympathetic in the traditional sense. She self-medicates with alcohol, she manipulates, she spirals in ways that are uncomfortable. If you've ever seen someone or been someone trying to hold on to love, no matter the cost, parts of this will feel uncomfortably familiar. That said, the emotional repetition did start to wear a little thin toward the end, which kept this one from being a full 5-star for me. Still, it's one of those books that lingers and makes you reflect, even if it doesn't always feel good while you're in it. I gave this one 4 stars. Okay, I Shot by Taylor Adams. Taylor Adams is an author I've had mostly good luck with, so I was hopeful going into I Shot. And for the first half, I was totally locked in. The setup is pure adrenaline. A couple stranded in the desert, hiding behind their broken down vehicle, while a sniper has them in his sights. There's nowhere to run, no cell service, and the heat is brutal. It's a claustrophobic, pulse-pounding scenario that somehow stays engaging despite the stagnant setting. And the way the characters shift between panic, accusation, and cooperation felt incredibly realistic. But then things shift. One of the characters, James, pulls off feats of survival that went from impressive to borderline cartoonish. And that gritty realism from earlier gave way to something much less believable. Also, the backstory for the main couple was totally a bizarre choice for this particular thriller. If you know, you know. I don't want to spoil anything. Anyways, it felt unnecessary. That said, I still had a good time with the first half and appreciated Adams's knack for building unbearable tension. It just didn't maintain momentum. I ended up settling on a 3-star rating for this one. Okay, so The Perfect Child by Lucinda Berry. I picked this one up on both audiobook and ebook, and it scratched a very specific itch for me. Creepy kid horror. But what makes this one interesting is how it walks the line. Are we dealing with pure evil or a severely traumatized child with deep psychological wounds? This story is told mostly from the adoptive parents' perspectives, which added a lot to the tension. Watching their dynamic shift, starting out so loving and united, only to slowly unravel as they became consumed with fear, stress, and disbelief. That was probably the most compelling part for me. There's something so eerie about seeing a family implode from the inside out, and this book taps into that with some solid intensity. Janie, the child at the center of it all, her bond with the adoptive father and open hostility towards her adoptive mother really fuels that unsettling atmosphere. She's calculating, way more calculating than she should be for her age, but also broken, which leaves you guessing how much of this is her fault and how much is it the fault of the system that failed her. That said, I did feel pretty let down by the ending. There is no real catharsis. It's the kind of book that builds and builds, but leaves you sitting with this uncomfortable, unresolved tension, and not in a satisfying, wow, I need to process this. More like, wait, that's it? I still gave it 3 stars because it kept me turning the pages, but I kind of wish that all that buildup had led somewhere more meaningful. Okay, next I read Pucking Sweet by Emily Rath. This is book 3 in the Jacksonville Rays series. I'll start by saying I really did enjoy the first book in the series, Pucking Around, which is a Why Choose romance, as is this one. The dynamic there, though, actually delivered on emotional depth and believable chemistry. Okay, so Pucking Sweet, it starts off promising. We've got a slow burn connection between Poppy and party boy defenseman Lucas. Yes, another Lucas. But the spark fizzles from there. Colton, the third in this MMF trio, is the definition of dull. But Lucas and Colton ended up being the sweetest part of the triangle. Overall, this book lacked the layered chemistry I expected after reading Pucking Around. Worse, the writing felt incredibly juvenile, especially in the steamy scenes, which were more cringe than swoon. I found myself skimming or wincing through moments that were supposed to be hot and heavy. And Poppy's family drama, it felt like an attempt to raise emotional stakes that never quite landed. If you're a series completist like myself, it's not the worst thing ever. While it didn't live up to the potential or the heat of the previous books, I still enjoyed being back in the Jacksonville Rays universe. 2.5 stars. Okay, we're going into another disappointment, and that is Great Big Beautiful Life by Emily Henry. I've read all of Emily Henry's romances, and unfortunately, this was by far my least favorite. The writing, as always, is solid. That's never in question with Emily Henry, but almost everything else here didn't work for me. The love interest, also a complete snooze, and borderline rude. Grumpy sunshine dynamics rarely work for me when the grumpy part crosses over into just being kind of a jerk, and this one definitely did. On the flip side, our protagonist is so sunshiny, it borders on willfully naive, though to be fair, she is called out for this, which felt like the only grounded moment in the entire book. Add in 2 competing storylines, the romance and the biographical mystery, and neither ends up feeling fully developed or emotionally satisfying. The structure kind of mimics The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid in a much lighter, attempting to be more romantic form, but where TJR's storytelling felt rich and layered, this felt scattered. One plot seemed like a vehicle to justify the other, and neither delivered a payoff worth the buildup. That said, one flop doesn't ruin my faith in Emily Henry. She's still an auto-read author for me. I just hope the next one brings back more of the spark I know she's fully capable of. 2 stars. I never thought I'd say that with an Emily Henry book. Okay, we are very much switching gears here. The Black Farm by Elias or Elias, still not sure, with Roe. I featured this one in my last reading vlog, and it was definitely a gripping read. The Black Farm starts with Nick and his partner Jess making a heartbreaking decision. They end their lives after experiencing unbearable pain and loss. But instead of peace, Nick wakes up in a place worse than any imagined hell, a twisted, nightmarish world known as the Black Farm. What pulled me in right away was the world building. It's dark, original, and genuinely unsettling, almost like a horror fantasy hybrid. The creatures and the structure of the farm are creatively grotesque. There's real emotional depth here. His pain feels authentic, and the story becomes just as much about grief, loyalty, and personal growth as it is about the horror surrounding him. There's something really moving about watching someone climb back from absolute emotional rock bottom, especially when the environment is this horrific. I also appreciated that the horror didn't feel like shock value for the sake of it. It served the emotional stakes and didn't come across like it was written through the male gaze, which honestly surprised me. That said, the ending didn't quite land for me. With such a unique premise, I was hoping for a twist or final gut punch, but instead it just kind of unfolded in a straightforward way. It made sense, but didn't blow my mind. Still super readable, super intense horror novel that stuck with me more than I expected, and I gave this one 3.5 stars. Okay, you guys, last and certainly least, When Stars Align by Melissa De La Cruz. I'll be upfront and say I gave this one 1 star and I should have DNF'd it. I grabbed this one through Amazon First Reads and read it the month before it released, which honestly made it all the more disappointing that I pushed through on this one. The premise had some early promise, mainly where Miranda was concerned, which was the washed up actor trying to claw her way back into relevance. She initially held my interest, but by the halfway point, I was completely checked out. The book reads like it was originally drafted to be a screenplay, and then it was hastily turned into a novel with awkward third-person narration and zero emotional depth. It lifts so heavily from pop culture moments that it feels more like a mashup of old headlines than a story with actual human characters. And despite dramatic themes, rehab, fame fallout, fractured friendships, there's no reason to actually care. I only kept reading because I saw a review that claimed that the ending was the best part. Maybe they meant that sarcastically. I took it literally, and it definitely did not redeem this book. Definitely one of the most unenjoyable and frustrating reads I've read in a long time, at least the last year. Did I say I gave it 1 star? Let's really hammer that nail in. 1 star. Thanks so much for hanging out with me on this gloomy day through the flops, the gems, and all. If you've read any of these, or if one caught your eye, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if you had a standout read or a major disappointment in April, let me know. I'm always looking to add or cautiously avoid adding to my TBR. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to give it a like or subscribe if you haven't already. I've got more bookish content on the way, and I'd love to have you along for it. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you again soon in the next one. Bye!